I'm Munib, and while we're all here very close to sea level, I just want everyone to come up with me directly up 5 kilometers up in the sky. At 5,000 meters, it's December, it's minus 35, and I hear a little crick, and that's my blanket that breaks because it's so cold. it's negative 35. And the Goba, the village head person, has just knocked on the door asking me and Dorje, my colleague, to wake up. It's a bit awkward because Dorje and I are cuddling each other because it's so cold. It's normal. You get to know your colleagues very well up there. and we wake up and he's like, come on, get ready. We need to go to Tongon. So we come out. But before we leave, he's like, oh, let's have breakfast because it's far away. And in his traditional Changpa style, this is up in Changthang in northern India, he serves us a meat stew for breakfast. And again, this meat is yak meat, they dry it, and it's super, super hard. And again, Dorje and I don't want to be disrespectful, so we try to bite it, but it's not going in. So we just find the right opportunity to put it in one of the cups and then discard of it later, very respectfully. And when we're ready, the Goba tells us, let's go to Tongon. Dorje and I have been walking for 3 days to reach the plateau where we were, Tegasong. And Tongon now is another 2.5-hour walk. There's a lot of snow. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of a situation. And there's not much chattering happening along the way. It is cold, but there's something else on the mind, my own mind, Dorje's mind, and the Goba's mind. We reach Tongon. It's a small hamlet. There's a few rebos, tents scattered around. There's silence. Herders all around, looking at us, but not talking to us. There's piles upon piles of dead sheep and goat. At one moment, I see a female herder in the distance, not too far, and she's opening a packet of Maggi. Maggi are these instant noodles back home in India, very, very cheap and served with a lot of love to any guest that comes, right? And my first thought was, like the 500 packets of Maggi I've had this month, like this is for us. But I see her feed that packet completely dry without being cooked to this one flailing goat that she owns. I know the context, but I'm still confused. I walk more and the Goba just tells us, this has been the hardest year in 30 years. It's been the coldest year, but there has been no snow or very little. And because of the cold, there's not much to eat. And as he's walking us through this little hamlet, we literally, without even exaggerating, see sheep and goat trembling and ceasing to exist and dying next to us. And then he just looks back at us and says, can you do something here? And I thought that was one of the most awkward questions that was posed to me in my life, because that's when I was like, oh, like what is my place here? What can I even do? Or rather, what can Dorje and I even do? I was thinking about why I was there. I was working for a wildlife conservation organization. What could we do? And then the Goba said, this is the worst in 30 years, but I think I know what could be done, because he could clearly see that we were completely bewildered by his question. So we asked, what would you do? He said, in the traditional days, we used to get barley. It's a crop that's grown high up in the Tibetan plateau because it's very, very resistant to cold. We used to get barley from the western part of Ladakh, where we were, which is 200-300 kilometers away. We would take our yak and horses and stock up on barley in the summer and get it for the winter. And when there were days like this, once in a while, we'd feed our sheep and goat barley, and they would survive. Yes, a few would die, but that will get them through. So my question was, okay, why don't you have barley now? I mean, I didn't ask it in that tone, but my mind did. And Dorje had that conversation with him, asking him exactly that, or trying to deconstruct that. And he said, there's been so many changes that it's just impossible for them as herders to physically go to the western part, get barley, lack of barley availability, and so on and so forth. But he's like, what? If we get some barley now, we can redeem just even that one herder who has 5 goats left out of 150. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is a great idea, but I was very conflicted. Everything I was taught was like, fodder is bad. If you give fodder to the livestock, they're going to eat all the grass. That's bad for the wildlife. So with these thoughts, I went back down to our office. We had a long chat with our bosses and colleagues, and everyone was like, no, giving barley or fodder is bad. It's bad. And Dorje and I were just not convinced. And somehow we convinced one of our bosses that At this one point, we will provide barley. I mean, this is the worst thing to do in terms of like just providing something, but we just had to do it. Emotionally, it was something that we just could not do. And then we went back. I mean, there was a whole other story as to how we got the barley. It was very unconventional. We got it. We found ourselves back in Tongon. And this time there was like 6 tons of barley. So each bag is 50 kgs, and I think we had 150 bags of those. So remember, now we've got to do the 3-day trek to the Goba's house, and then the 2.5 hours in the snow. And this time we have 100 and something yaks to put the barley on. And finally we reach Tongon again. And there we start giving out bits and bobs of barley. And a really wonderful gentleman came up to me and he said, in Ladakhi, Thuk Cheche, which is thank you. And he said, very honestly, you know, the amount of barley you've gotten is amazing, but actually for all the goats that are still alive, it might be a couple of handfuls of barley. But what we will always remember is even when we went through this disaster and we were always told, go to the sheep husbandry department, go to the government, and we did, nobody really came to us. And you guys were there with us. And even while we understand the limitations of you guys working in a small organization, you did what you can. So we'll remember that. And that to me stayed with me a lot. And as I was leaving from that scene, again, I looked back to that lady who was feeding the Maggie to her goat a few days ago when I had seen her. And she just smiled. And that smile was one of the most beautiful things I'll ever remember. But it also made me think again, okay, what was my role as a wildlife conservationist here? You know, I was taught from a young age and still think about this whole idea of, in these amazing mountains up in the Himalayas, the snow leopard is the keystone species. The keystone species, every link goes through the snow leopard, even though there are both positive, negative interactions with other wildlife that the snow leopard has. And I thought to myself, is this the time to reimagine these pastoralists as the keystone, if I can use the word species, in these landscapes? Because they have obviously positive but also negative interactions with things, but they are the true custodians. They've been there for millennia, and they have a more local land use in these areas. And the last thought that I want to leave us with this evening is, if you come up to my landscape, like there was a talk about trees by Theo, right? Like there's no trees in my landscape. The biggest thing is about the size of my ankle, which is a Karagana bush. And everybody hates seeing a Karagana bush because it looks very awkward, it's thorny, you know, nobody wants to touch it, almost nothing eats it, right? It doesn't look that glamorous. But within the Karagana bush, you have these little shrubs, or rather herbs, grasses growing. It shelters them from the cold and all grazing and predation, if I can call it, by birds. So it's a really important plant. Now imagine if there was a seed of the Karagana bush just on the path that I'm walking. I have a choice to walk over it and trample it, or I have a choice to water it, even if it's one drop. So the thought that I want to leave us with is, when we're working with communities, are we just hearing them out, or are we truly listening? Because solutions often are there locally, they might just need to be operationalized. Thank you.